My name is Victoria and I'm 29 years old. For most of my life, I was the good daughter, the reliable one, the family's built-in safety net. And then, over a plate of roast chicken, I learned that my love was not a gift, but a currency they had no intention of repaying. This is the story of how I stopped paying, but before I tell you how everything flipped, like and subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you are watching from. The night my old life ended, it smelled like rosemary and garlic. My mother, Clara, believed a good roast chicken could solve anything. It was her answer to bad news, her celebration for good news, and her default setting for a quiet Sunday evening. The house was filled with the warm, comforting scent, a smell that had always meant family and safety. Tonight it felt like a lie. I had been the one to prep the chicken, rubbing the spices under its skin just the way she liked. I had peeled the potatoes and put them on to boil, arranging the green beans in the steamer. My sister Lily had been upstairs on the phone with a friend, her laughter floating down the stairs like little bells. My father, Mark, was in the living room, the low murmur of the television the only sign he was home. It was a scene painted from the scrapbook of a perfect family, and I was the invisible artist who made it all happen. Dinner was served at 6 o'clock sharp, as always. Dad came to the table, his eyes still glued to some game on his phone. Lily bounced into her chair, her blonde hair swishing over her shoulders. She was 2 years younger than me, but she had a glow that made her seem like the center of the universe. To my parents, she was. "This looks amazing, Mom," Lily said, reaching for the chicken. "Vicky helped," Mom said, waving a dismissive hand. It wasn't a compliment. It was a statement of fact, as casual as saying the sky was blue. I had helped. I always helped. I sat in my usual chair, the one with the slight wobble that no one else wanted. I served myself a small portion of potatoes and a few green beans. The conversation swirled around me, a familiar current I was never quite a part of. They talked about Dad's golf game, about a sale at the department store where Mom wanted to buy a new handbag, and about Lily's friend who had just gotten engaged. I listened, nodding at the right moments, a ghost at my own family's table. It was when Mom set down her wine glass, leaving a perfect red ring on the lace doily that the world tilted on its axis. "Oh, that reminds me," she said, her voice light and breezy. "I booked the tickets for the trip today." My heart gave a little jump. We'd been talking about a family vacation for months, a 2-week trip to Italy. It was meant to be a celebration of my parents' 30th wedding anniversary. I had been saving for it, putting aside extra cash from my job as an office administrator, picturing myself standing in front of the Colosseum. "That's great," I said, managing a smile. "When do we leave?" My father grunted from behind his phone. Lily's eyes lit up, but it was my mother who delivered the blow, with the casual precision of a surgeon. "Well, sweetie," she began, the word sweetie a soft cushion for the punch that was about to land. "We ran the numbers and we just can't afford 2 tickets. We're only taking your sister this year." The clatter of my fork against my plate sounded impossibly loud in the sudden silence. I blinked, the image of the dinner table blurring for a second. The smell of rosemary was suddenly cloying, suffocating. "2 tickets?" I repeated, my voice small. "There are 4 of us." Mom gave a little sigh, the kind she reserved for when I was being difficult. "2 tickets for you kids, I mean. Obviously your father and I are going. It's our anniversary." She looked at Lily and smiled, a warm, genuine smile that I hadn't seen directed at me in years. "And Lily deserves it after everything she's been through. Everything she'd been through." It was their favorite phrase. It referred to Lily's recent and rather dramatic breakup with a boyfriend who had lasted all of 3 months. It referred to her quitting her part-time job because her boss was unreasonable. In my family's language, Lily's minor inconveniences were tragedies. My major sacrifices were expectations. I looked at my father, hoping for an ally, for even a flicker of support. He didn't look up from his phone. He just cleared his throat and said, "You're an adult, Victoria. You're 29 years old. You can take your own vacation anytime you want." The words hung in the air, cold and final. It was true. I was an adult who had given them thousands of dollars from my savings to fix the roof last year. An adult who co-signed the loan for Lily's car when her credit was rejected. An adult who paid for the groceries more often than not, because Dad's pension didn't stretch as far these days. I was an adult, and my money was their money. My time was their time. But my seat on a plane? That was my own responsibility. They went back to their conversation as if I had said nothing. They talked about luggage, about the direct flight Mom had managed to find, and about how excited they were to see the Amalfi Coast. Each word was a tiny shard of glass embedding itself in my chest. Then Lily, my little sister, looked at me across the table. There was no malice in her eyes, only a thoughtless, casual cruelty. She grinned, a perfect, dazzling smile. "Don't worry, Vicky," she said, twirling her fork in her mashed potatoes. "I'll send pictures." My father chuckled. My mother smiled fondly at her, and in that moment something inside me broke. It wasn't a loud, shattering noise. It was a quiet, clean snap, like a thread that had been pulled taut for too long, finally giving way. For my entire life, I had been trying to earn my place at this table. I had worked harder, given more, and sacrificed pieces of myself to fit into the puzzle of this family. I bought the expensive birthday gifts, remembered the anniversaries, and mediated the arguments. I paid their bills, fixed their problems, and asked for nothing in return, hoping that one day they would see me, that one day my love and my effort would be enough. But sitting there, listening to them laugh, I finally understood. Love in this house wasn't a right. It was a privilege, handed out to the chosen one. And I was not the chosen one. I never would be. I was just the foundation, the silent, sturdy thing they all stood upon. And they had forgotten I was even there. A strange sense of calm washed over me. The hurt was still there, a deep, cold ache, but it was accompanied by a new, sharp clarity. I picked up my fork. I took a bite of the chicken I had cooked. It tasted like nothing. I smiled, a small, quiet smile that didn't reach my eyes. "That sounds wonderful," I said. "I hope you all have the best time." They accepted my surrender without question. They didn't notice the emptiness in my voice or the resolve hardening in my gaze. They just saw what they always saw. Good, reliable Victoria, accepting her place on the sidelines once again. I finished my meal in silence. I cleared the plates just like I always did. But as I stood at the sink, hot water running over my hands, I wasn't thinking about revenge. Revenge was messy and loud, and it would still keep me tied to them. No, my plans were much quieter. I was planning for freedom. I wasn't always invisible. Or maybe I was, but I just hadn't realized it yet. When you're a child, you don't see the subtle currents of favoritism. You just know that your sister's drawings get the center spot on the refrigerator, while yours are tucked away at the side. You just know that when Lily cried, she was comforted, and when I cried, I was told to be strong for her. I learned early on that my role was to be the steady one, the responsible one, the one who didn't cause trouble. The real shift began when I was 19. Dad lost his job at the manufacturing plant where he'd worked for 20 years. The factory was downsizing and his position was eliminated. He came home one Tuesday with his belongings in a cardboard box and a look of stunned defeat on his face. The house, which had always felt so secure, was suddenly filled with a thick, heavy silence. Panic was a metallic taste in the air. I was in my first year of community college, working part-time at a local cafe to pay for my books and gas. That week, without anyone asking, I went to my manager and told her I could take any extra shifts available. I started working mornings before class and closing shifts at night. Sleep became a luxury. My studies suffered, but the sight of my weekly paycheck, which I would endorse and hand directly to my mother, felt more important. I was helping. I was contributing. I was saving us. "Thank you, Vicky," my mother would say, her eyes welling with tears as she took the money. "You're such a good daughter. I don't know what we'd do without you." Those words became my drug. I chased that feeling of being needed, of being essential. I dropped out of college the next semester, telling myself it was temporary. I got a second job on the weekends. I was convinced that my sacrifice was the glue holding my family together. Dad eventually found a new, lower-paying job, but by then, the pattern was set. My income was no longer my own. It was part of the family pot, and my family was very good at spending. When I was 22, my mother decided she wanted to refinance the mortgage to pay off some credit card debt they'd accumulated. The bank told them they didn't have enough equity. But, the loan officer had suggested, a cash payment of around $8,000 would solve the problem. That night, my mother sat me down at the kitchen table, the same table where I would later be uninvited from my own family vacation. "I know it's a lot to ask," she'd said, her hands twisting a napkin, "but it would be such a help. It's just temporary, of course. Once we get the new rate, we'll be able to pay you back within a year. I promise." I had exactly $8,421 in my savings account. It was every dollar I had managed to squirrel away over 3 years. It was my dream of going back to school. It was my escape hatch. I looked at her worried face, at the stress lines around her eyes, and I thought about the house I grew up in. I thought about being the good daughter. "Okay, Mom," I said, my voice barely a whisper. I transferred the money the next morning. They never paid me back. When I brought it up a year later, my father got defensive. "Don't you think we would if we could, Victoria? Things are still tight." My mother said I was putting unnecessary pressure on them. It was easier to let it go. It was easier to be the good daughter. Lily, meanwhile, floated through life on a cloud of my money. She never had to learn the hard lesson of a budget. When she wanted the newest iPhone, she didn't save for it. She'd come to me. "Vicky, my old one is so slow. Can you help me out? I'll pay you back from my next paycheck." Her next paycheck would come and go, spent on clothes or nights out with friends, and the debt would be forgotten by everyone but me. The biggest betrayal came when she turned 21. She wanted a new car, a reliable one to get to her classes at the university, the 4-year university I was indirectly funding. Her credit was non-existent. The dealership wouldn't approve the loan without a cosigner. My parents couldn't do it. Their debt-to-income ratio was too high after the mortgage refinance. All eyes turned to me. "It's just a signature, Vicky," my dad said. "She'll make the payments. It's to build her credit." I knew it was a terrible idea. Every financial instinct I had screamed no. Co-signing a loan for someone with no history of financial responsibility was foolish. I tried to refuse. "I don't know, Dad. It's a big risk." That was the first time I saw the switch flip. The warm, appreciative family disappeared, replaced by something cold and hard. "Selfish," my mother had muttered under her breath, just loud enough for me to hear. "After everything we've done for you, you can't do this one thing for your sister." What had they done for me? They had given me a roof over my head, yes, but it was a roof I was now helping to pay for. They had fed me, but I was now buying the groceries. They had clothed me, but I hadn't bought myself a new coat in 3 winters. The accusation stung, sharp and unfair. Guilt, their most effective weapon, flooded my system. I was being selfish. My sister needed me. I signed the papers. For the first 6 months, Lily made the payments. Then she missed one. I got a call from the bank. I spoke to Lily, who promised she'd just forgotten and would catch up. The next month, she missed another. Soon, the payments were coming directly out of my account every month to keep my own credit from being destroyed. When I confronted her, she cried. She said her new job had cut her hours and she just couldn't afford it. My parents told me to be more understanding. "She's your sister," my dad said, as if that explained everything. Over 10 years, my life became a series of quiet sacrifices. I was the emergency fund, the lender who never called in a debt, the silent partner in their comfort, and with every yes, I earned their conditional approval. They called me responsible, generous, the family rock. I was a good daughter, but if I ever hesitated, if I ever hinted that I might have needs of my own, I was selfish. I was ungrateful. I was difficult. It took me a decade to see the transaction for what it was. I wasn't giving to my family out of love. I was paying for their affection, and the price kept going up. I wasn't a daughter. I wasn't a sister. I was their safety net, woven from my own broken dreams. And a safety net is only noticed when it's gone. The night after the dinner, the quiet of the house was different. It wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, weighted down with unspoken truths. The leftover roast chicken sat in the fridge, but the thought of it made my stomach churn. My parents and Lily were in the living room watching a movie. Their laughter, muffled through the walls, sounded foreign and distant, like it was coming from a stranger's home. I sat on the worn couch in my small bedroom, a space that felt more like a dorm room than a part of a family home. Around me were the artifacts of a life on hold, stacks of books I meant to read, a secondhand laptop, bills neatly piled on my desk, my own bills, car insurance, my phone bill, the student loan payments I was still making for the 2 semesters of college I'd managed to complete. My phone felt cold in my hand. I opened my banking app, my thumb hovering over the screen. I didn't know what I was looking for, but I felt a magnetic pull toward the truth. No matter how ugly. I navigated to my transaction history. I set the date range to 10 years ago and hit enter. The screen refreshed and a list began to populate. It scrolled on, a digital river of my own financial. Bleeding October 2015. Transfer. To Mom. 508 reason. Leaky roof. January 2016. Transfer. To Lily. $300. Reason. College textbooks. March 2017. Credit card payment. Sovereign 200, my dad's card. He'd sworn it was a one-time emergency. I kept scrolling. My thumb began to ache. Each line item was a memory, a small surrender. There was the $8,000 for the mortgage, a stark, glaring number. There were the monthly car payments for Lily's loan, an unrelenting rhythm of $350, over and over again. There were hundreds of smaller transactions. $100 for groceries, $50 for Dad's prescription copay, $200 for the family cell phone plan that was in my name, because my credit was the only one good enough to get it without a deposit. The numbers blurred together. A long, painful story of my 20s. It was a decade of my life, quantified in dollars and cents. A decade where I had traded my future for their present. I saw the deposits from my paychecks, steady and reliable. And then I saw the withdrawals, a constant draining outflow that always left me hovering just above zero. I connected my laptop to my old printer, the one I'd bought for Lily when she was in high school. The machine whirred to life, spitting out page after page of my bank statements. The pile grew on the floor next to me. It felt like I was printing out my own ghost. When the printer finally fell silent, I sat on the floor with the stack of papers. With a pen and a calculator, I began to add. I worked methodically, my hand steady. This wasn't an act of anger. It was an audit of my life. I circled every transfer to my parents, every payment made on Lily's behalf, every bill I had covered for the household that was not my own. The numbers climbed. 10,000, 30,000, 70,000. The air in the room grew thin. My breathing was shallow. I felt a cold knot of nausea tightening in my stomach. This was the money I could have used for a down payment on a small condo. This was the money that could have finished my degree, allowing me to get a better job. This was the money that could have been my own vacation to Italy or anywhere else I wanted to go. This was the price of being the good daughter. When I finally wrote down the grand total, I stared at the number until it was burned into my memory. $112,419, $112,419. I leaned back against my bed. The papers spread around me like fallen leaves. That number wasn't just money. It was 10 years of my life. 10 years of saying yes when I should have said no. 10 years of believing their empty promises of, we'll pay you back. It was the physical proof of my own invisibility. They hadn't stolen it from me in one grand heist. They had bled it from me, drop by drop, day by day, calling it love, calling it family, calling it my duty. I thought of my father's words at dinner. You're an adult, Victoria. You can take your own vacation. They had made sure of it. They had taken my wings and then told me I was free to fly. The hypocrisy was so profound it was almost absurd. I didn't cry. The time for tears was over. My grief had been replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I stood up and found an old, expandable folder in the back of my closet. I began to organize the papers. First, the bank statements, highlighted and dated. Then, I went through my email and printed out every message where I'd agreed to send money. I found the loan agreement I had co-signed for Lily's car. I even found the receipts for the major appliances in the house, the new refrigerator we bought 2 years ago, the washer and dryer, the 65-inch television in the living room. All of them had been purchased with my credit card, another temporary expense they had never repaid. I placed every single piece of paper into the folder. On the front, I took a black marker and wrote one word in clear, bold letters: reality. That folder was more than just a collection of documents. It was my resignation letter. It was my closing argument in a case I had been losing my entire life. It was my armor, because I knew them. I knew that when I finally walked away, they would paint me as the villain. They would call me ungrateful, selfish, a monster who had abandoned her family. But this folder held the truth. It was proof that I hadn't abandoned them. I had funded them, and my service was officially over. I had paid for my family in full, and now I was finally going to pay myself. They left on a Wednesday morning. The air was crisp with the promise of autumn, and the sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue. It was the kind of perfect day that made you want to start something new. For them, it was a vacation. For me, it was a revolution. I stood at the kitchen window, sipping my coffee, and watched them load the car. There were 3 large suitcases, a garish floral tote bag my mother loved, and a palpable sense of excitement that vibrated off them in waves. My father directed the loading of the trunk with military precision. Lily chattered endlessly about the things she planned to buy. My mother buzzed around them, doing a final check of her purse, her sunglasses perched on her head. They were so caught up in their adventure that they barely noticed me. I was just part of the scenery, the quiet fixture in the house they were so eager to leave behind. All right, we're off, my mom called out as she came back inside for a moment. She gave me a quick, distracted hug that felt more like a brush-off. Keep the houseplants alive, sweetie. And don't forget to bring in the mail. Don't touch my room, Lily added from the doorway, wagging a finger at me playfully, as if I had any interest in her sanctuary of fast fashion and half-empty makeup palettes. I won't, I said, my voice even and calm. I met her eyes for a moment, and for a split second, I wondered if she saw anything different in me. But she just smiled, her mind already 3,000 miles away, somewhere over the Atlantic. Have a safe flight, I said to them all. It was the last thing I would say to them in that house. I watched as the car backed out of the driveway. They laughed and waved, and I raised a hand in a final quiet goodbye. They thought they were leaving me behind for 2 weeks. They had no idea they were leaving me behind forever. The moment their car turned the corner and disappeared from view, the silence they left behind was vast and absolute. For a few minutes, I just stood there, letting it wash over me. It didn't feel empty. It felt clean. By noon, my new life was in motion. I had spent the last 2 weeks planning every detail with the quiet efficiency of a general preparing for battle. I made a phone call to a number I had found online. The company called itself Silent Separations. Their website was discreet, their services tailored to people leaving difficult situations quickly and quietly. They specialized in logistics, not judgment. "This is Victoria," I said when a calm voice answered. "We spoke last week. I'm ready." 2 hours later, a large unmarked moving truck pulled up to the curb. 2 men dressed in simple gray uniforms got out and walked to the door. They were polite, professional, and asked no questions. I had already paid for their services in full, online, with the last of my savings. I met them at the door and handed them the folder, the one labeled Reality. "Everything I'm taking is backed up by a receipt in this folder," I explained, my voice steady. "The items are all mine. I purchased them. My name is on the paperwork." The older of the 2 men, whose name was Dave, opened the folder and glanced through the first few pages. He nodded slowly, a look of understanding on his face. He had seen this before. He closed the folder and handed it back to me. "You just point, ma'am," he said. "We'll do the rest." And so it began. They moved with a quiet, methodical grace. The first thing to go was the 65-inch television from the living room, then the couch and the armchairs, the coffee table I had assembled myself. Piece by piece, the life I had subsidized was dismantled and carried out my front door. We moved through the house, room by room. From the kitchen, they took the new refrigerator, the microwave, and the expensive coffee machine I'd bought my mother for Christmas. From the laundry room, they took the washer and dryer set I was still making payments on. I left their old, worn-out furniture. I only took what was mine, what I had paid for. The house began to look hollow, like a skeleton picked clean. The rooms echoed with our footsteps. When they reached Lily's room, I stopped them at the door. "Nothing in here," I said. I had bought her the laptop on her desk and the bed she slept in, but I left them. This wasn't about being punitive. It was about severing financial ties. Those were gifts, and I let them go. I was taking back the things that had been presented as shared family property, the things that blurred the lines between contribution and ownership. Finally, all that was left were the few boxes I had packed for myself, my clothes, my books, my personal belongings. The movers loaded them onto the truck last. They would be driving them to a storage unit in a city 3 states away, a city I had already chosen for my new beginning. My own car was packed with only a suitcase and a cooler of snacks for the road. The house was barren. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the empty spaces. It looked strange, unfamiliar. It was no longer a home. It was just a building. I walked to the kitchen counter, the only piece of furniture left. I took out a single sheet of paper and an envelope. With a steady hand, I wrote my final message. "Mom, Dad, and Lily, everything I took was mine. Every item was paid for by me, and I have the receipts to prove it. You will find that anything that was truly yours is still here. For years, I funded your lives while you called me selfish for wanting a life of my own. I'm done being your second option, your backup plan, and your bank account. Enjoy your trip. I'll enjoy my life. Victoria." I folded the note, slipped it into the envelope, and wrote "Family" on the front. I left the house key on top of it, a final symbolic gesture. I was returning their key, and in doing so, I was taking back my own life. I walked outside for the last time, into the bright afternoon sun. Dave and his partner were closing the back of the truck. He gave me a simple nod. "Good luck, ma'am," he said. "Thank you," I replied. I got into my car, started the engine, and pulled away from the curb. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I didn't look back. There was nothing left for me there. The first 3 days of my new life were spent on the road. I drove through rolling hills and sprawling flatlands, through crowded cities and empty highways. With each mile I put between me and that hollowed-out house, a layer of weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying began to peel away. I listened to music I hadn't heard in years. I ate at greasy roadside diners and slept in cheap, anonymous motels. For the first time, I felt the exhilarating, terrifying thrill of being completely and utterly on my own. I arrived in a small mountain town where the air was thin and clean, and the sky seemed impossibly large. I had rented a small furnished cabin online, sight unseen. It was tiny, with just a bedroom, a small kitchen, and a living area with a stone fireplace. But as I stood in the doorway, smelling the faint scent of pine and wood smoke, I knew it was perfect. It was mine. The silence here wasn't heavy or oppressive. It was peaceful, filled with the gentle sounds of the wind in the trees. I spent the next 2 weeks settling in. I retrieved my belongings from the storage unit and slowly began to make the cabin feel like a home. I started my remote job, the one I'd secured weeks earlier. I created a new routine for myself, one that didn't revolve around anyone else's needs or demands. I woke up with the sun, drank my coffee on the small wooden porch, and watched deer wander through the yard. In the evenings, I read the books I'd always meant to read. The anxiety of waiting for my family to return was a low hum in the back of my mind, but it was drowned out by the overwhelming feeling of peace. I was breathing again. The storm broke on a Tuesday, exactly 2 weeks after I'd left. My phone, which had been blissfully silent, buzzed on the kitchen counter before the sun had even risen. It was a text from my mother. Mom, Victoria, what have you done? The house is empty. Where is everything? Call me right now. I read the message and felt a strange sense of detachment. The panic in her words felt like it belonged to someone else's life. I put the phone back down and continued making my coffee. A few minutes later, it buzzed again. This time it was my father. His message was blunt and threatening. Dad, this is theft. We are on our way to the police station. You have 1 hour to call us and explain yourself before we file a report. Then came the message from Lily, laced with the dramatic flair I knew so well. Lily, I can't believe you. You ruined our home. Mom is having a breakdown. How could you be so cruel? The texts kept coming, a barrage of anger, confusion, and accusations. They called me a thief, a monster, an ungrateful child. Each message was a confirmation that I had done the right thing. They weren't sad that I was gone. They were furious that their things were gone. Their comfort had been disrupted, their easy life dismantled. That was my crime. I didn't reply. The note I left had said everything that needed to be said. The truth doesn't need a defense. I turned my phone on silent, put it in a drawer, and went for a walk in the cool morning air. By the afternoon, I knew I had to face the legal threat. With a deep breath, I called the lawyer I had consulted 2 weeks prior. He was a specialist in domestic and financial disputes, and I had paid him a retainer fee for this exact moment. Hello, Victoria, he said, his voice calm and professional. I take it they're home. They are, I said, my heart pounding a little faster. They're threatening to file a police report for theft. They already did, he replied calmly. I received a call from a Detective Miller about an hour ago. He was enthusiastic. My stomach dropped. And, the lawyer continued, a hint of amusement in his voice. I emailed him the scanned copies of the receipts and bank statements you provided me, the ones from your folder, the ones with your name on every single purchase. I explained that you simply reclaimed your own property, which you were legally entitled to do. I held my breath, waiting. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, the lawyer said. Then the detective informed me that this was a civil matter, not a criminal one, and that the case was closed. Case closed. The words echoed in the quiet of my little cabin. A wave of relief so powerful it made my knees weak washed over me. I sank into a chair, the phone still pressed to my ear. And then, a sound I hadn't heard from myself in a long time bubbled up from my chest. It started as a shaky exhale, then turned into a quiet, disbelieving chuckle. Then it grew into full, unrestrained laughter. I laughed until tears streamed down my face, but they weren't tears of sadness or anger. They were tears of pure, unadulterated release. It was the feeling of finally being able to breathe after holding your breath for a decade underwater. The weight wasn't just lifted, it was gone, vanished. The threats were empty. The power they held over me was an illusion, one that I had helped maintain, and now I had shattered it. In my small mountain cabin, miles away from the mess I had left behind, I laughed. And for the first time in my life, the sound was entirely my own. It was the sound of freedom. 3 days passed after the lawyer's phone call. 3 days of profound, undisturbed quiet. The initial, explosive relief had settled into a deep, steady calm. The constant threat I had lived under for a decade, the threat of their disapproval, their anger, their disappointment, had been revealed as nothing more than noise. Their power was gone because I had taken it back. I was beginning to learn the rhythms of my new life. I knew how the morning sun hit the porch. I knew the specific call of the blue jay in the pine tree outside my window, and I knew the simple, grounding pleasure of making a pot of coffee that was entirely for me. I was sitting on that porch, my laptop open but ignored, a half-empty mug steaming beside me when my phone buzzed. I had taken it out of the drawer but kept it on silent, a tool I now controlled rather than the other way around. I glanced at the screen. It was Lily. My first instinct was to ignore it, to let it go to voicemail, to delete the notification, to pretend it never happened. What more was there to say? The legal battle was over. The financial ties were severed, but something made me hesitate. It was a faint whisper of the sister I once thought I had, the little girl whose hair I used to braid. It was a morbid curiosity to hear what came after the anger. Did they have a new strategy? A new angle of attack? I decided to answer, not out of obligation, but out of a clinical desire for data. I needed to know if this chapter was truly over. I let it ring 3 more times, took a slow, calming breath of the cool mountain air, and then I answered, placing the phone on the table and putting it on speaker. I didn't want it close to my ear. I didn't want her voice inside my head. "Hello?" I said, my voice neutral. For a moment, there was only the sound of her shaky breathing. Then Vicky? Her voice was nothing like it had been in the texts. The righteous fury was gone, replaced by something thin and trembling. It was the voice she used as a child when she wanted something, the one that had always worked on our parents. It no longer worked on me. "It's Victoria," I said, my tone still even. "What do you want, Lily?" "We came home to nothing," she whispered, as if I didn't already know. "The house it's empty. Mom's been crying for days. She won't come out of her bedroom. Dad is just sitting in the empty living room, staring at the wall. You did this." The accusation was there, but it was limp, exhausted. She was reciting a script, trying to activate the guilt that had been my primary programming for 29 years. But the code had been rewritten. "I left what was yours," I said softly, repeating the simple truth. "And I took what was mine." I looked out at the vast expanse of green trees before me, a landscape that held no judgment. But the couch? "The TV? The refrigerator?" she cried, her voice cracking. "How are we supposed to live? You took everything." "The couch I bought when Mom's back was hurting and she needed more support," I said, my voice a flat recitation of facts. "The TV I bought because Dad wanted a bigger screen for his games. The refrigerator I bought with my credit card when the old one died and you had no money for a new one. I have the receipts for all of them, Lily. They were never yours to begin with. They were just another loan you never intended to repay." There was a choked sound on the other end of the line. She was trying to process a reality that had never been allowed to exist in that house. In her world, things just appeared when they were needed. She never had to ask where they came from. "How could you do this to us?" she whispered, falling back on the one question she thought I couldn't answer. "We're family." The word hung in the air between us, stretched thin and meaningless. Family. For a decade, that word had been a cage, and I had dutifully locked myself inside it every night. Now from the outside, I could see it for what it was. "Family?" I said, and for the first time a trace of emotion entered my voice. Not anger, but a cold, hard clarity. "Let me tell you what family isn't, Lily. Family doesn't watch one child work herself to the bone so the other can live a carefree life. Family doesn't drain their daughter's savings account and then call her selfish for wanting to build a future of her own. Family doesn't offer love and support as a reward for financial compliance. You didn't treat me like family. You treated me like an ATM, and you're angry because it's finally out of cash." The silence that followed was heavy and absolute. I had taken her word, her final weapon, and I had dismantled it piece by piece. She had nothing left to fight with. All the usual tactics, the tears, the guilt, the accusations, had slid right off me. Then, in the smallest voice I had ever heard from her, a voice stripped of all its usual confidence, she asked the real question. The one that lay buried beneath all the anger about the furniture. "Do you hate me?" I thought about it for a moment. I searched myself for that feeling. I thought of the missed payments, the broken promises, the casual cruelty of that last dinner. I felt the ache of years of being overlooked. But hate? Hate was a fire. It required energy, passion, engagement. What I felt for her was nothing. It was a quiet, empty space. The part of me that had been reserved for my sister was as hollowed out as the house I had left behind. "No," I said finally, and it was the honest truth. "I don't hate you, Lily." I could hear her exhale, a small gasp of what might have been relief, but I wasn't finished. "I just stopped financing you." I ended the call. I didn't slam the phone down. I simply pressed the red icon on the screen. I picked up my coffee mug, took a sip of the now lukewarm coffee, and turned my attention back to the mountains. There was no anger. There were no tears. There was just peace. A vast, quiet, and unshakable peace. The last thread had been cut. The following week, my new life continued to take shape. The call with Lily had been a final, necessary amputation. The phantom limb of my old life still ached occasionally. A flicker of guilt when I bought a new sweater. A moment of loneliness in the evenings. But the feeling was fading, replaced by a growing sense of wholeness I had never known. I was learning to enjoy the sound of my own thoughts, to trust my own instincts, to be my own companion. My mail was being forwarded from my old address to a P.O. box I had set up in town. One afternoon, while sorting through the usual junk mail and a few bills, I saw it. A plain white envelope addressed to me in my father's angry, slanted handwriting. My stomach gave a familiar, reflexive clench, the conditioned response of a daughter who had spent her life bracing for her father's disapproval. But then the feeling passed, as quickly as it had come. I was no longer that daughter. I took the letter back to my cabin, sat down at my small kitchen table, and opened it, not with dread, but with a detached curiosity. I was no longer a participant in this drama. I was an audience member watching the final act. The letter was short, as I knew it would be. My father was not a man of many words, especially when it came to his emotions. His primary language was anger, and he was fluent in it. "Victoria, I don't know what you think you've accomplished with this stunt, but you have made the biggest mistake of your life. You have thrown away your family for a pile of furniture. We gave you everything, and you have repaid us with this disgusting, selfish act of betrayal. Your mother is sick with grief over what you've done. Do not expect us to come crawling to you. Do not expect our help when your new life falls apart, because it will. You are not as strong as you think you are. You have made your choice, and now you will have to live with it. You'll regret this when you're alone. We were the only ones who ever truly cared about you, and you threw it all away. Marky didn't even sign it, Dad." It was a formal, cold dismissal, a final verdict from the judge who had presided over my life. I read the letter twice, letting the words wash over me. The old me would have been devastated. The old me would have cried, would have felt the crushing weight of his condemnation, would have believed every toxic word. The old me would have seen this letter as proof of my own failure. But the woman reading this letter now saw something else entirely. She saw a desperate last-ditch attempt at control. He was trying to use his most trusted weapon, fear. The fear of being alone. For my entire life, that had been the unspoken threat. Be good or you'll be alone. Do what we ask or you'll be alone. Don't upset us or you'll be alone. I looked up from the letter and out the window. A gentle rain had started to fall, tapping softly against the roof. The trees outside were a deep, vibrant green, alive and breathing. Inside, my cabin was warm and safe. It was filled with my books, my music, my peace. And I realized the profound irony of his words. I had never been more alone than when I was living in that house, surrounded by the three of them. I was alone at the dinner table while they talked around me. I was alone on my birthdays when they gave me cash and a card while Lily got thoughtful, expensive gifts. I was alone late at night, worrying about the bills I was paying for them. That house wasn't a home. It was a crowded, noisy island of isolation. My loneliness there was a constant, aching presence. Here in my cabin, I was in solitude, but I was not alone. For the first time, I was with myself. I was getting to know the person who had been buried under years of obligation and sacrifice. I was learning what she liked, what she dreamed of, what made her laugh. I was finally my own companion, and I was discovering that I was pretty good company. A slow smile spread across my face. It wasn't a smile of triumph or revenge. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated freedom. He thought loneliness was my punishment. He had no idea it was my reward. I folded the letter neatly and placed it back in the envelope. I didn't tear it up. It felt important somehow. It was the last piece of evidence. It was the closing statement from their side of the argument, and it proved my entire case. It was the final, undeniable proof that I had made the right choice. Their love was conditional, their care was a transaction, and their family was a prison. And I, for the first time in my life, wasn't alone. I was free. My new life began quietly. It wasn't a sudden cinematic transformation, but a slow, gentle unfurling, like a fern in the spring. The first few months were about establishing new rhythms, new routines that were built around my own needs, not the needs of others. The seasons changed outside my window, the vibrant greens of summer slowly giving way to the fiery oranges and deep reds of autumn. And with each passing day, I felt myself changing too. The centerpiece of my new life was my morning coffee. Back in my old life, mornings were a frantic rush of making sure everyone else was taken care of, making sure Dad had his coffee just right, that Lily had a clean work shirt, that the dishwasher was unloaded before Mom came downstairs. Now my mornings were a sacred ritual of stillness. I would grind the beans, boil the water, and pour it slowly, inhaling the rich, dark aroma. I would take my mug to the porch and sit, watching the mist burn off the mountains. It was a small thing, a simple cup of coffee, but it was a daily declaration of independence. It was mine. My work, which had once been just a means to an end, the source of the funds I funneled into my family's endless needs, became a source of pride and focus. Working remotely, free from the constant stress and interruptions of my home life, I found that I was good at my job. Really good. I took on new projects. My confidence grew. And 3 months in, my boss called to offer me a promotion and a significant raise. I accepted, my voice clear and steady, and after I hung up, I felt a quiet joy that was entirely my own. It was a success they couldn't take credit for, a validation earned on my own terms. The most profound change was financial. For the first time in my adult life, my paycheck was mine. All of it. I created a budget, a real one, with categories for savings, for retirement, for an emergency fund. I watched with a feeling of near disbelief as my savings account, for a decade a barren wasteland, began to grow. First $1,000, then $5, then $10. It was a safety net I was weaving for myself, thread by thread. One day, I walked past a store in town and saw a beautiful deep blue winter coat in the window. The old Victoria would have admired it, calculated its cost, and then walked away, the familiar voice of guilt whispering that it was too extravagant, that the money could be better used elsewhere. The new Victoria walked into the store, tried it on, and bought it without a second thought. Walking out into the crisp autumn air, wrapped in the warmth of my new coat, I felt not guilt, but a simple, profound rightness. It was more than a coat. It was an act of self-care, a quiet acknowledgement that I was worthy of warmth and comfort. But rebuilding wasn't just about solitude and financial stability. It was about learning how to connect with people on healthy terms. Loneliness did occasionally creep in, a quiet echo in the stillness of the evenings. I knew I couldn't live on my mountain forever without human connection, so I took small tentative steps. I started visiting the local farmers market every Saturday, making small talk with the vendors. I joined the town library and struck up a conversation with the librarian over a shared love for mystery novels. My biggest step was joining a local hiking group that met on Sunday mornings. The first time I went, I was nervous. My social muscles atrophied from years of disuse. But the people were kind and welcoming. They were a mix of ages and backgrounds, all drawn together by a love for the mountains. They didn't ask about my family or my past. They talked about trails, about wildlife, about the simple joy of being outdoors. One of my fellow hikers was a woman named Sarah, a retired teacher with a kind smile and wise eyes. We fell into an easy rhythm, often walking together. One day, she asked me a casual question about my plans for the upcoming holidays. A jolt of panic went through me. I don't really have any plans, I stammered. My family. We're not in touch. I braced myself for the pity, the awkward questions. Instead, Sarah just nodded. Sometimes the family you choose is more important than the family you're born into, she said simply. Well, a few of us from the group who don't have local family get together for a potluck. You're more than welcome if you'd like. Her casual acceptance, her respect for my unspoken boundaries, was a revelation. There was no judgment, no pressure, just a simple, kind invitation. It was a type of interaction I had never experienced before. I started to understand that peace wasn't just the absence of my family's drama. Peace was the presence of respect. It was the presence of boundaries. It was the presence of people who saw me as a person, not a resource. As winter approached and the first snow began to dust the peaks of the mountains, I looked around my small, warm cabin, a place that had become my sanctuary, my home. I thought about the simple, quiet life I was building, brick by brick. It turns out, peace isn't given to you. You don't inherit it, and you can't buy it. You have to earn it. You have to fight for it. And just like I had earned every single dollar they had taken for granted, I was finally earning a life that was truly, completely, and peacefully my own. Almost a year had passed since I'd driven away from that hollowed-out house. A year of quiet mornings, challenging work, and peaceful evenings. A year of building a life from the ground up, a life that fit me perfectly. The mountains had become my home, their steady, silent presence a constant source of strength. The woman who had fled in the night felt like a distant relative, someone whose story I knew, but whose pain I no longer wore like a second skin. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, I was clearing out my personal email inbox, deleting junk mail and unsubscribing from newsletters. My eyes scanned the list of senders and one name made me pause. Lily. The subject line was just my name, Victoria. My finger hovered over the delete button. My immediate gut reaction was to erase it, to pretend it never existed. I had worked so hard to build this fortress of peace, and I was terrified to let anything from my past breach its walls. I owed them nothing, not even the courtesy of reading a message. What could she possibly have to say that would matter now? An apology? A new demand? Another accusation? But curiosity, A stronger force than I anticipated won out. This felt different from the desperate phone call. A year was a long time. A part of me needed to know how the story ended. With a deep breath, as if bracing for impact, I clicked it open. The email was short. Her writing style, usually littered with emojis and exclamation points, was simple and direct. Victoria, I don't know if you'll even read this. I don't blame you if you delete it. A lot has happened since you left. Mom and Dad are the same. They're still angry. They talk about what you did like it was yesterday. They bought new furniture on a credit card, and Dad is working part-time as a delivery driver to help pay for it. He hates it. Things have been different for me. The car was repossessed a few months ago. I couldn't make the payments on my own. I had to learn how to take the bus. I have 2 jobs now, one at the coffee shop and one working retail on the weekends. It's the first time in my life that I've ever had to actually budget. It's the first time I've ever had to say no to myself because I couldn't afford something. Last week, my phone broke, just completely died. My first thought was, I'll just ask Vicky. And then I remembered. I sat on my bed and cried for an hour. Not because I couldn't have a new phone, but because I finally understood what it was you did for me. For all of us. You were the person we called. You were the one who always fixed it. We never once stopped to think about what it was costing you. I get it now. I know that's probably too little. Too late, but I wanted to say it. You were never selfish. You were just tired. I wish I'd understood sooner. Lily. I read the email once. Then I read it again. The words didn't trigger the anger or pain I had expected. There was no triumphant surge of, I told you so. Instead, I felt a quiet, distant sadness. A sadness for the sister she could have been, for the family we might have had if things had been different. She wasn't asking for forgiveness. She wasn't asking for money. She was just telling me. She was bearing witness to a truth she had finally been forced to see. The old me, the caretaker, the fixer, would have replied immediately. She would have offered words of comfort, told Lily it was okay, maybe even offered to help. Her pain would have been a call to action I was conditioned to answer, but I was no longer that person. I sat there for a long time, watching the rain streak down the window pane. Her understanding was a gift. But it was a gift I no longer needed. My peace was no longer contingent on her validation. My reality didn't require her signature for approval. I had already approved it myself. To reply would be to reopen a door I had fought so hard to close. It would be an invitation for more conversation, more entanglement, and I had finally, blessedly, untangled myself. My healing didn't require me to participate in her newfound awareness. My forgiveness didn't need an audience. With a quiet click, I moved the email to a folder I named Archive. I didn't delete it, but I didn't leave it in my inbox either. It was a part of the story, a final chapter, but not one that required a response. I stood up and walked to the kitchen to make tea. A small, genuine smile touched my lips. I forgave her. In the quiet of my own heart, I forgave her. Not for her, but for me. It was a silent, personal act of letting go, the final cinder of resentment turning to ash. It was a forgiveness she would never hear about, just as my pain had been a sacrifice she had never seen. And that felt perfectly, peacefully, balanced. If you've ever been the forgotten child, the one who gave until there was nothing left, hear me clearly. You don't owe anyone your peace just because they share your blood. You can walk away without slamming the door. You can leave everything behind and still come out whole. Because sometimes the quietest revenge isn't anger or shouting. It's finally living a life they can't take credit for. If you've ever been told to stay silent, to settle for less, or to keep paying your way into love, this story is for you. Hit like if you've ever been underestimated. Subscribe for more stories where silence becomes strength. And tell me in the comments, would you have left or stayed?